Good evening and welcome to News Review. The Chief Minister, Fabian Picardo, this week wrote to Labour leader Ed Miliband expressing his dismay at UK newspaper reports claiming that a Labour government would want British overseas territories to be internationally blacklisted if they do not compile public registers of offshore companies. Mr Miliband was said to have sent letters to the leaders of all the overseas territories, reportedly giving them all a 6-month deadline by which they would have to comply or face being placed on an OECD list of tax havens facing sanctions. Mr Picardo said he hasn't received the letter. He spoke to our news editor Stephen Nish.
Well, it was important that we react quickly to the press reports of what Ed Miliband was talking about in relation to all overseas territories without discerning the fact that Gibraltar is part of the European Union and is in a different position. It was therefore fundamental that I get something out to him in the heat of the moment. You know that the UK news cycle continues through the weekend. It was important by the time I appeared on Sky News with Dermot Moynihan on Sunday morning, I should be able to say that I'd replied to the letter that Mr Miliband had purportedly sent me, which I haven't yet received.
Well, the issue for Mr Miliband, of course, is that he wants the central register of companies that is put together by the overseas territories to be a public one. You don't necessarily agree that that's a good idea?
Well, the position is that I've already spoken this morning to the office of Mr Miliband. I've been speaking to his chief of staff. They now understand the issues as they relate to Gibraltar, and I'm very positive about the engagement that I've had with them this morning. They realise now that Gibraltar's obligations, like the UK's obligations, will be to comply with the 4th Anti-Money Laundering Directive, which will become, we think, a directive in September, according to the timetable that the Commission has proposed at the moment, and that the transitional provisions should be 2 years hence, in September 2017, for there to be a Europe-wide provision for a central register in each member state. Gibraltar is a separate jurisdiction and therefore we'll have our own central register. What we won't have is unanimity in the European Union, let alone in the rest of the world, as to whether those central registers should be public or not public. Now, Gibraltar believes that making a central register easily accessible to law enforcement, as easily accessible as information is today, even though it's not in a central register, it's held by each individual registered company and trust provider, then that is sufficient to ensure that you have the transparency required. We don't think that making the whole thing public is necessary. And there is in fact a balance which other member states and other countries around the world consider is appropriate between privacy and confidentiality on the one hand of people who are conducting their corporate affairs entirely properly and not to avoid or evade taxation, and the need to have everything be public in the future. Look, we could take further steps and say that everybody's bank account should be a matter of public record so that we know that you, Stephen, are just getting your salary and I, Fabian, am just getting my salary. But look, just because there are some people who commit fraud, it doesn't mean that every person in the world should lose their right to privacy and confidentiality.
Well, if Labour does win the election in May and Mr Miliband sees this policy through, won't Gibraltar and possibly the other overseas territories be heading for a constitutional crisis with the UK?
Not at all. In my discussions this morning with the Labour Party leader's chief of staff, it's very clear that they did not for one moment intend this suggestion of direct rule by the back door, that they realise that central registers are likely to be the standard across the board, that making them public may be a more controversial issue. You've seen that the Chancellor of the Exchequer has been very tough on Mr Miliband, saying that he would find himself with Berlin and Washington perhaps having to be on his blacklist if he's not going to just discriminate against offshore territories. So I think the position is becoming clearer and it's not that sort of issue that we have to look at. These are the first shots in the general election campaign in the United Kingdom. We just have to make sure that we are not cannon fodder in that process.
Well, and the Chancellor actually went a little bit further than what you said. He said that this was further evidence that Mr Miliband is not fit to be Prime Minister. Would you comment on that?
That's the sort of thing Mr Caruana used to say about me.
Meanwhile, the chairman of the Conservative Party, Bob Neill MP, described Ed Miliband's statements on Gibraltar and tax transparency as a cack-handed intervention. Mr Neill, who attended Gibraltar's National Day, told Parliament that the fact that through a mixture of ignorance, bad manners and ineptitude, he's given comfort to people who are persecuting the British citizens of Gibraltar economically in order to score a cheapskate and inaccurate political point is contemptible and nothing short of a scandal. He adds it's extraordinary that the leader of the opposition should have rushed into print without having checked basic facts, such as the tax information exchange agreements Gibraltar entered into. Google, he supposes, was not working well in Mr. Miliband's office. This week we found out that the Spanish government was ready to renege on another Córdoba agreement. According to the ABC newspaper, it set the wheels in motion to close the Instituto Cervantes in Gibraltar. GBC has been unable to verify the news as the Instituto's director, Francisco Oda, could not be reached.
The Instituto opened 4 years ago following the Córdoba agreements that formed part of the Trilateral Forum for Dialogue. The Pepe government was never totally in agreement with it being in Gibraltar, seeing it as tacit recognition that the rock was not Spanish territory, as all Instituto Cervantes aimed to promote the Spanish culture and language abroad. According to the Spanish press, the Cervantes Council has highlighted its Gibraltar office as one of the ones to be closed, believing other countries are now the priority. The final decision will be taken by a ministerial council after the matter is studied by the Council for Foreign Affairs. The Spanish press believes the closure aims to send a message to London that the Spanish government is not pleased with the confrontational politics over the past few years. It highlights that the Cervantes Institute has never been inaugurated by any Spanish official and has never seen the Spanish flag flying from it.
The RGP believes that there was excellent cooperation amongst the essential services during last weekend's incident at the airport. The regiment's bomb disposal unit was called in to deal with the situation after reports of smoke coming from luggage on an EasyJet flight. The incident also made the international press.
The incident sparked a major response, with passengers who had boarded the EasyJet flight requesting to disembark. The explosive ordnance disposal team scanned every item of luggage, and there was no need for a controlled explosion. Access to the airport was closed and businesses in the area evacuated. Traffic in and out of Gibraltar was stopped for over 2.5 hours. This resulted in long tailbacks, which would have been worse if the weather had been better and there'd been more cars on the roads. Nevertheless, the police introduced traffic management procedures following the incident to ensure a smooth return to normality. The situation was described by the RGP as a false alarm with good intent. An EasyJet statement said the flight had been delayed due to technical issues and that this had resulted in the smell of smoke. The flight to London Gatwick had been due to leave around midday but left the Rock over 3.5 hours later. British Airways flight was diverted to Malaga.
The Spanish foreign minister has admitted to having contacted the organisers of the Nueva Economía Forum in Madrid to put to them why the chief minister should not be allowed to address it. José Manuel García Margallo admitted this in the Spanish parliament, and reacting to the address in parliament, the chief minister said there was nothing to add, as the foreign minister's statements really spoke for themselves.
José Manuel García Margallo also told the Foreign Affairs Commission of the Spanish Parliament last night that he did not, and neither should any Spaniard, recognise the office of the Chief Minister. Among his statements, he said the Instituto Cervantes should not be located in Gibraltar because Gibraltar is Spanish and that its removal was being considered, contrary to the agreements made at Córdoba. He also agreed he was seeking to suspend the application of the Single Skies 2 package to Gibraltar, again contrary to the Córdoba agreements. Perhaps less befitting of a Spanish foreign minister was his comment that everyone in Gibraltar spoke Spanish apart from the monkeys. The chief minister says Mr. Margallo's statements really speak for themselves and for what he represents. Fabian Pigardo says he is pleased to see statements from other party representatives advocating a return to dialogue, and says Mr. Margallo's position appears increasingly to be a radical and isolated one that has gained no traction beyond the Partido Popular.
The move this week from the KG5 building to the new mental health facility Ocean Views went smoothly without a hitch. That was according to the government, which says this was due to thorough planning and hard work by the Gibraltar Health Authority staff. The residents moved into the new unit at the former Naval Hospital last Saturday.
Residents of the KG5 have finally made the big leap to Ocean Views, a new facility comprising of 5 new wards, 52 bedrooms, a cafe, visitation area, an arts and recreation centre, gardens and plenty of leisure space.
Well, delighted to have been able to leave the old KG5 behind, that old building which was not fit for purpose, which had so much stigma attached to it by the community as a whole when we didn't understand mental health services. The building that was described even by a GSD minister as the Cinderella of the health service that they did nothing about for 16 years. So it's an absolute pleasure to be able to move into this modified new facility, modified because the plans that we inherited were not exactly as they should be. We had to spend time and money modifying them, and we have today the mental health facility that 21st century Gibraltar deserves as a country that can describe itself as third in the ranking of GDP per capita. If we are that, then this is the sort of mental health facility that we deserve.
Not only is this a new building, but it's also the beginning of a new way of delivering mental health. The Chief Minister has very rightly said how the team is trying very, very hard to destigmatize mental health. And the old building and the total lack of fitness for purpose of that building served to perhaps make the stigma even worse than it would otherwise have been. So we're very pleased to leave that behind in the history of mental health services in Gibraltar.
Forensic furniture to reduce injury, light sensors, anti-ligature furniture to avoid the risk of self-harm, and distressor alarms if patients require assistance are just some of the new features installed at the facility. And one big contrast, no bars on the windows, but instead reinforced glass to enjoy the spectacular views. 2 rehabilitation flats are also now available for the first time in Gibraltar to encourage reintegration back into the community. In a press conference today, the Chief Minister said mental health problems could affect any one of us at any one time, and Ocean Views is a long-term investment for the whole community.
We're investing in people who need our help, the most vulnerable in our society, the people, in this particular instance, those that have mental health problems and were confined, condemned to the KG5 that the GSD left us. This is a sort of investment that our community needed because it wasn't made before.
Big transition for the patients as well. It's still early days, but how are they finding their time here?
Well, I think a hugely positive transition for the patients to find themselves in this sort of facility, which is designed to ensure that they can come back into community, that they have all the services available that are designed to help them to achieve that, rather than simply what I heard one of the nurses and GHA professionals describe as the KG5, which was simply almost storage for people who couldn't be helped to come back into our community. That is a step change for a community. It's almost a step change in Gibraltarian civilization.
The face of some of the residents as they walked into this new facility spoke for itself.
Health Minister Dr. John Cortes described Saturday's move as a life-changing day for many people. Dr. Cortes tweeted the occasion throughout the day, saying it represented a new beginning for many and a future with dignity.
And the GSD congratulated the government on the opening of the new mental health facility. It said it's absolutely right that with the new unit comes a new approach to mental health care within an environment of healing and meaningful rehabilitation. Health spokesperson Isabel El-Hammad expressed delight the government had successfully completed the project, saying this was planned and started by the GSD, although recognizing there remained much to do. The GSD, however, raised concerns about the amount of time it says it's taken government to open the new Alzheimer's and dementia facility at the same site, which it says was nearly ready when the GSD left office in 2011. And we'll be back with more of this week's news after this break.